Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee.
Good evening. Welcome to In Session. I'm your host, Dr. Farid Holakouee, and I'll be with you for the next hour here on Radio Hamra. Very happy to have the author of the book of the week with me tonight, Jamaal Aflatooni, who I'll introduce to you in just a second. He wrote the book Space Between Us, which was the book of the week from last week, and very, very happy to get to have him on the show tonight. But before I do so, let me tell you a bit about him. Jamaal Aflatooni is a local author in the Bay Area, living in Walnut Creek with his wife and daughter, Eliana. Growing up in his hometown of Pendleton, Oregon, Jamaal always had a passion for astronomy, writing, and science fiction novels, and Carl Sagan's Contact in particular was a favorite. Jamaal studied sociology at the University of Oregon, where he grew an interest in the study of society, cultures, and lifestyles. Witnessing the divisiveness, bigotry, and violence plaguing our nation inspired him to write Space Between Us, a story about a boy, but more so a story about us as a society. And let me bring him on. Jamaal, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Yeah, Farid, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Sure. So I read your book, really enjoyed it. It was a page turner, and we talked before the show about how, and this is tough because I have guests sometimes on, but usually it's for nonfiction books, so there really aren't any spoilers in that, just the different facts or studies and things that come up. But because your book is a book of fiction, and there's a lot of, I don't want to even say twists and turns, but there's things that hopefully the readers will get to find out for themselves. We want to be aware of that so that people, I hope you will, buy the book Space Between Us and read it for yourself. So we'll get a bit into the book and some parts of the plot without giving too much away. But first, before we even get into that, I wanted to know more about what made you, there was a sentence there in the description, but tell me a bit about what made you want to write this book.
Yeah, so as a kid growing up, I'd always wanted to write about stories. I was just kind of always in an imagination form, if you will, just thinking about, what life would be like living in the story of a fictional character. And so I'd actually sort of developed the idea for this specific story, Space Between Us, around the time that I was in college, and I just never really got around to writing it because I was just busy with life. And then, without getting too political, in 2016, when the presidential election was happening, everything was just very heated. Everything was very charged as it came to so many things being polarizing and divisive that I thought, this is a good time for me to write this book. And I guess the downside of living in the Bay Area and working in San Francisco, but living outside of it, is that you have a long commute into work. But I was able to actually write most of the book on my commute. So I take the train into work, not anymore because everyone's working remotely, but at the time I take the train into work every day, and it's about an hour each way, so 2 hours a day. And I just worked on it for a good 2 or 3 years, just on my commute. And I said, I'm going to do something with my time on this long commute that I have. And yeah, as far as my inspiration, that's really what sort of kind of boiled down to it, was seeing how divided we were becoming as a society. And obviously there's more to the story than just, talking about, society at large. But that's really what made me kind of want to get into this book a little bit further.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I think, these issues, social issues, I talk about them on the show, people write and talk about them, but often through fiction, through art, we can express some ideas or give a different perspective. And I definitely felt that in the book, because you see, again, without giving too much away, but who we consider us and them, it could be so many things that in one context it might be one way, but then it might expand. Your us can expand to include more people, or the other way, we can contract and think, no, this is my group or tribe, and there's this other that's scary. And that theme came up throughout the book a lot, that we tend to be afraid of what appears different from us and what we don't know, that fear of the unknown. So I think, unfortunately, as you're saying, we're seeing that more and more across the world, but also in the United States, where people who just think different or are different political clans or tribes think they have to hate each other or be afraid of each other, and we're seeing the unfortunate consequences of that. And so the book surrounds the main character, Darwin Sanders, and we get to learn a lot about him, and you learn more and more throughout the book. I sometimes wondered as I was reading it, often they say some of fiction is always partially autobiographical. So was there any of that for you in writing this book that you related to this protagonist, the main character?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I get asked that sometimes, and not really. I think the only thing that I could potentially relate to an extent is, I grew up in a very small town, predominantly white, and I'm half Persian, so I don't have the full experience of someone that comes from a full Persian background. But I think because my last name Aflatooni, a little bit darker than most of the kids that I went to school with, I was not treated differently by any means, but I think that kids maybe saw it as a little bit odd. Like, what kind of last name is that? Like, where are you from? Oh, Iran. I've never heard of that. So I think in that sense, the main character in this story, experiences a lot of, sort of outsider feeling, if you will, that he just doesn't really feel like he belongs, that he doesn't relate to people that well. And I don't think I got that necessarily as much when I grew up, but to an extent, just given the fact that I was the only other Persian kid, in my entire class. So I think in that sense, it's a little bit different. But outside of that, no, not really. Nothing really that would have been autobiographical.
Got it. Yeah. We see Darwin has a lot of just feeling different, feeling left out. He gets bullied by some kids in particular, but in general, he has a skin condition, vitiligo, where there's patches of his skin that are, discolored, and so he just looks different, and he has this sense always of being a little bit different, and sadly, many people treat him worse for being different. Some people actually see him for just being a being, and he does have some of those experiences as well that you see. And yeah, I could get what you're saying. Even being bicultural as you are, that's kind of like a space between us. Like, there are these within yourself, there are these two different cultures, and people often actually can have a hard time trying to integrate that into their whole person. Sure. So I could see that you had some of that living in a town also where your name might have been a little bit different, complexion might have been a little bit different. So it seems that wouldn't say you're so much like Darwin, but some of those themes you might have experienced in your own life. And I think that's a lot of what art is doing, is that we're not going to we might relate to a character. Even reading the book, I related to Darwin, I related to other people, not as if I thought I was exactly them, but parts of their experience I could relate to as just this living experience that we can go through. So I thought that was nice, that I felt that in the book, that you could really see the different characters and different parts of them might relate to you as well. So maybe you see yourself some of Darwin, some of Tyler, who also he meets in high school at Crimson, and all of that. So I could imagine there's a lot of you throughout the book, even if it's not exactly your life story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's always sort of a feeling when you're really young and you're still trying to figure yourself out, where you kind of feel not just that you don't belong, but also that maybe there's something more to my life than I know. Or that I'm aware of right now that's going to be made aware later on down the line. That's exactly what was the case with Darwin, as I'm sure you know, and for any reader who's going to read the book, obviously they come to realize who Darwin is as a person, right? More than just a boy. Yeah,
we get to learn about him, and as you said, even if we don't necessarily go through it like he did, oftentimes in our adolescence, young adult age, we come to learn who we are a bit more. So I think that theme was in the book as well. Now he gets kind of some news that helps him understand that in a way that most people won't necessarily relate to. But I think often we still can have that experience of learning about ourselves and who we are. And sometimes we're even a stranger to ourselves to some degree. We don't fully know all the aspects of ourselves until we start to experience things and express those different parts. So I thought about that also in Darwin's experience, that we see that happening in a larger scale.
Absolutely. No, completely agree.
Yeah. This theme you brought up, things being divided, the polarization, that theme comes up a lot in the book as well. Even just people being, for now I'll just call it anti-immigration. That theme comes up with people not being supportive of people that they might see as different from them. Was there anything in your own life, I know you mentioned being a little bit different, or what you were seeing in the world, what made this seem so important for you to talk about? Because that was one of the main themes I took from the book, is recognizing how we see this other as so different from us, but maybe they're really not. So I'm wondering if there was something there that was significant to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm a Baha'i, and so growing up as a Baha'i, I have a very specific way of how I kind of view other human beings, and I really see all human beings as one, right?
Mm-hmm.
One human race. And so, I was thinking why, society in general. I mean, it doesn't even just relate to America, that can be across the world. There's always going to be you versus the other, and why, we think in that specific way. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we just don't understand the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we create this space, we create this division between us because we don't actually understand where this person is coming from, right? We have these sort of preconceived notions based on what's happened in history and things like that, to where we say that, I don't like this person because they stand for this, or because they look like this, without really even getting to know them. And I think if, people really, took a step back and realized, we're all humans, it's like we're all living on this earth together and trying to work together to make it a better place for not only ourselves, but for future generations. And so, I think that was really what got me so motivated again to write this book, was that I think my way of thinking and how I view the other, so to speak, is I want to learn as much as I can about them to be able to actually understand what makes them them. Because I think if I really boiled down to it and got to know them better, that I would realize that there really isn't that much difference between us as human beings. Obviously, there's going to be small, changes here and there. There'll be cultural differences and things like that. But for the most part, we're good people, and we want to do good in this world. And so, I think that's sort of the thing for me, is I think it boils down to education, right? And really educating ourselves to understand how we as a society function, and how we can really understand the rest of the people around us, and to make this world a better place.
Yeah, that I totally agree with you. This sense that because someone is different, there is a human tendency when something is different, we notice it. It's brought to our attention. But and so some people will conclude, I've even seen people write articles, well, then, racism is inborn or innate, because we see these studies of where babies will differentiate between, faces of someone from their own race versus someone that's different from their race. And to me, it means you notice it, but does it mean you're going to have to respond in a negative way? That, I think, is much more, learned, and there's a lot more there. And as you're saying about knowledge or knowing about the other, whatever that other means, when we don't know, we fill in the gaps. And so if you think about turning off the lights and you're in the dark, people usually get scared of the dark, because when we don't see what's there and we don't know what's there, we imagine something really dangerous is there. But if you turn on the light, you see nothing's there. Everything is safe and okay. And so I think the same thing is true about people in groups, that when we don't know, we fill in the gaps with all these scary things, trying to protect ourselves. That defensive, protective side comes out. But if, as you're saying, we get to know them, we turn on the lights and see who they are and see that they're just like us. Yeah, there's differences, but when it boils down to it, as you said, we tend to be the same, and our humanness connects us. Well, then you see there is nothing to be scared of, and there's a lot to love rather than hate.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. I mean, I think, and that's sort of the biggest issue right now that kind of just plagues everyone right now is these, barriers that we put up between others and the prejudices that we have, just based on, what has been told to us or what we've just, concocted in our own minds.
Yeah. We're just about at a commercial break, but it's interesting. I even said humans, and we're talking about things that I don't want to give a lot about the book away. But I was actually thinking after break, I wanted to hear some of your thoughts about life on other planets. Not necessarily having to get too deep into that, but just some thoughts even of how we treat all living beings, because I thought about that while reading the book as well. So again, joining me tonight, Jamaal Aflatooni, author of Space Between Us. Let's go to a commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Again, tonight I'm joined by the author of the book Space Between Us, Jamaal Aflatooni. Let me bring him back on the air now. Jamaal, you still there?
I am, yes.
All right, great. So, as I mentioned before the break, not getting too much into spoilers of the book, but it is a science fiction novel, and there is themes of space and other planets and things of that sort. So, I know it's an easy question to answer, but do you think there's life on other planets?
I do. I kind of go back to, and it's in the bio as well, one of my favorite books, Contact, which is also made into a movie. I personally like the book a little more, but the movie is also great as well. And I think, there's a line in there that talks about how when you kind of understand the vastness of the entire universe and, how many, billions of galaxies there are in the universe and just the sheer number of stars that are in each individual galaxy, you almost kind of have to think there's no way that there could possibly not be life on other planets. And it might not be the life that we know it right now as human beings, but something in that form. So yes, I do think that there is life on other planets in some form. Whether or not we will discover that in my lifetime or my children's lifetime, who knows? But I do think that definitely that exists.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that too. I think, and I said life, and I think we found some life, or I should say, evidence that there's life even on other planets in our solar system, or that there might have been some kind, but now by life, meaning like maybe unicellular type stuff. But I guess I also meant more like intelligent life, which I still think that's what your answer was addressing.
Intelligent life. I definitely agree. I think some form of intelligent life, maybe not in the way that we know it as like human beings, but in the vastness of this entire universe, I think it's like there almost has to be, right? Just because it's so incredibly large.
Yeah, I think these things, of course, it's a lot of we only can speculate because we obviously don't know. But I think with the vastness, as you're saying, the billions and trillions of stars, and we don't even know exactly how many galaxies and all those things, it seems likely to me. Now, what that means, and as you said, one thing as a psychologist, constantly learning about how we think and how we have biases in different ways, we obviously think, well, when I imagine an intelligent life form, I imagine something human-like, or because of what we've seen in science fiction books and movies, maybe something like what we see in alien movies, like the green guys. But it could be so different and something we can't even imagine or wrap our heads around. Right. But I do think it makes sense that there's some type of intelligent life form. And so in reading your book, it brought to my mind this thought of, well, sometimes we talk about, even like you're saying, well, we're all human beings and treating each other well, but what would we do if we encountered life on another planet, or if they visited us, or our technology advanced and we're visiting them? How would that go? I think, unfortunately, a sad world history of Earth shows that oftentimes it doesn't go well when new civilizations meet one another. Oftentimes it has not gone well. I would hope that we would advance to the point where that would not be the case, but I wanted to see or hear your thoughts about that, which that theme kind of does come up in the book. But what do you think about that? I know it's a very abstract kind of a thing, but just wanted to hear what you think.
No, I mean, I'm kind of with you. I think that I'm not quite sure that it would go well, and that's part of the reason why I talk about a lot of the themes that are in this book. Mm-hmm. I think that because of our history, and like you said, we've seen how when new civilizations come into contact with one another, that it's met with a lot of violence. And again, I think it kind of goes back to something that's different, and having this fear of what is different. And so I think something that massive, right? If alien life forms were to come in contact with Earth, it would scare people. I think, for whether it's good or bad, it's scary. Like, wow, I can't believe this is happening. This is, life from another planet. We never thought that this day would come, that we'd be around when this happened. I mean, I'm pretty sure we would all feel that way. And of course, then you have, the other end of the spectrum. Oh, well, we don't want them here. They're probably, coming here to kill all of us, and then, we should wage war against them. And maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic, but I just think that there'd be so many waves of emotions that would come from people if that were to happen, with alien life forms visiting us. But I think the question that you asked, which I'm actually more curious about, is rather than what we would think of them and how we would react towards them coming to Earth, is what would they think of us?
Right.
Seeing how we are as a society and how we've interacted as a society, obviously a lot of division, a lot of historical racism, people killing one another. I mean, there's a lot of issues in this world, a lot of good things in this world as well. I don't want to just paint it as a negative picture. But how would they think of us, and would we be proud of who we have become as a civilization, that we would say, like, yeah, we've done good on this Earth that we've created? That's what I'm really more curious about.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, how are they going to judge us for how we are? And,
right.
and it's hard, these things, again, are so speculative. But I think it can be interesting to ponder, because it can bring up some concepts or ideas that can relate to life now and what we experience. But even, I've read some theories, or so many different people have thought about these ideas where, once a civilization has the technology to do space travel in the degree they would need to find other life, they would take themselves out, because they create weapons that could then kill them. So maybe that's why we haven't seen them either, because that could be happening. Or, we kind of touched on this on the commercial break, but things like, would they visit us if they see, as you're saying, the state of things on our planet? Would they come visit us if they could? It's hard to know.
Right.
It's all these interesting themes. But I do think it brings to mind this sense that another thing, as you were saying, these people, another being, alien life form coming to our planet, I think we're so heavily influenced by the movies and books that have come out, which oftentimes have there's a negative. They're coming here because they ran out of resources, or to take, to kill
Right.
us or something like that. So I think people, unfortunately, have that in their mind. Probably, life imitates art, or I think imitates the psychology. When, something like this hasn't happened, we always have a fear of an unknown. So when you think of someone coming to our planet, the first thought is they're going to kill us. We have to protect ourselves. But maybe for a civilization to be able to travel that far, they would have to achieve some level of unity to be able to do something like that. That's something I also ponder on or think about. So maybe if they're coming here, they would be coming in peace, because they would have to be peaceful and unified in order to make that happen. But again, all very, very speculative, but I think it could be fun to think about.
Yeah, no, for sure. I always, love thinking about these extreme hypothetical scenarios, right? And, who knows, hundreds, thousands of years from now, maybe they won't be that hypothetical.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely something I think about too.
Yeah. I think another thing that could happen, or brings up again this theme of this us versus them, whereas you're saying, on planet Earth, even within every country, we'll see a lot of division that is still going on. But then once there is some other, any type of group tends to band together and become an us. So it could be interesting if we encountered another life form. Now, hopefully it wouldn't be hostile, but either way, would that make Earthlings kind of band together? It's like, hey, we're all on Earth, we're together, and they're like the other. So it's an interesting dynamic that could also come into play, of realizing we're more of an us. Now, then I think hopefully we'd achieve an interplanetary us as well, where we see that, well, we can all live together. And that theme comes up too, of could there be exchange between different groups, that they can actually help each other, rather than we have to be against one another. We have to be afraid of one another. So I thought, it's interesting. You brought up so many different themes in the book that made me really think about our current life on Earth and how we are united and divided in different ways.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that. And even when I was, writing this book, understanding, would there be ways in which we could potentially become united? What could happen that would make us a united civilization?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny you mentioned that. I think that in a way, which I guess necessarily isn't a good thing per se either, but like you said, when there is an other introduced or a them that's
mm-hmm.
introduced, the group that was once divided tends to band together to form against that other, so to speak, right? And so in this instance, it's like if we were visited by alien life forms, whether they were hostile or not, would we unite together to kind of band up against them? And I would hope that would not be the case, because I still don't think that's a good thing either. But it's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
Right? How would we react now, feeling like, oh, we are all together in this as Earthlings trying to survive, so to speak. So it's an interesting one, and it's one that I kind of struggle with in writing in this book for sure.
Yeah, because I think it's. I was having that thought talking about it, that I wouldn't want that to be the reason we band together, but it does happen a lot. It's a very. I think in a way it could be. I don't know if it is the fastest, but one of the fastest ways to bring people together is to create a common enemy. So that does happen.
Right.
But there's also evidence, I'm reminded of, there's a study in, I think it was by Sharif or something like that. I forget the author's name, but from a long time ago, this camp, and the study has been a little bit, the exact workings of it, some people have issue with. But nonetheless, the theme of it was there's these two groups of kids, and they kind of had them pitted against each other by giving them teams, and then they were doing nasty things to each other. But then they had them have to work on something together. It was like pulling a bus or a cart that was stuck in the mud. So they all had to band together to actually work together. So in a sense, the common enemy was a problem or something, not a group or people. So they actually did band together. So I would hope that would be the route that we find as humans, as a way of we're actually working together to eradicate problems that are hurting each other or hurting certain individuals, that would be our, the common cause rather than the common enemy would be our, path towards unity. But yeah, it is something interesting. I think if it would happen now with the state of affairs currently, it might bring everyone together, but would it be for the right reason? It might be to attack this new, life form we were encountering. And I would hope we would find a way to, again, find a common cause, which would be helping all of humanity rather than we want to kill someone else to protect ourselves. But I guess time, and maybe a lot of time, will have to tell what's going to happen there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I hope that it would be, like you said, for a common cause rather than a common enemy. But who knows? It's one of those things where we'll probably never really quite know. And we just hope that it would be for something that would be for a good thing.
I hope so. Yeah, I think I find myself being optimistic, and I think in the book, you do toe that line where there is, I think, a general optimism, but the real negative and nasty parts of the world shine through with lots of, like if you want to call it, not even racism, but things like that, or treating just people who are different from you negatively. You see that, but you also see the compassion of friends, of people. Even, Darwin himself was very committed to helping others. Maybe it started because of a crush on a girl that got him into volunteering a bit too, but nonetheless, he finds how meaningful it could be to serve others. And I thought that was also a nice theme that was woven into the book, was helping others and how it actually helps you feel good. I'm assuming this is another one of those parts that partially that's based on autobiographical experience.
Yeah, it is. You know what I mean? Obviously, I was raised to, being a Baha'i again as well, is finding ways for how we can serve others and serve society at large. How are we being of service to people? And that was kind of always something that was ingrained to me as a kid and from my parents is, are you helping others in some fashion? It's great that you're focusing on yourself in terms of your education, your schooling, and things like that, but also keeping others in mind. And so, I did a lot of youth service activities and things like that growing up. I actually did a year of service in another country in Venezuela. So, yeah, that aspect, I guess you're right. You're asking about, is there anything about this book that's autobiographical? That would be one element, right? Because I was encouraged a lot to do that kind of thing, whether or not, at a young age, it's like, I really don't want to. But when I actually did, I enjoyed doing it. Mm-hmm. And so obviously hope to, instill that sort of ideal of service to others in my kids as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think the characters might be partially autobiographical, but as I'm talking to you about it, I recognize the world view. Now, sometimes you might point the ugly things of the world that you want to put a flashlight on, but also your vision for the world. I think that probably shines through in the book too, of what you're hoping to see. And there's some sad things that happen in the book too, but I think there is definitely some messages that you make clear about people coming together, of respecting one another, treating each other with kindness, and that we all benefit when we help one another. I think your vision of your hopeful vision of the world is also in there as well.
Absolutely, for sure.
We're at our last commercial break, but after the break, we could talk a bit more about the book. I also wanted to talk to you. It's so nice to have an author on the show to talk about your process in writing the book. Oftentimes when people want to do anything new, there are some doubts, or there's lots of I can do it later, or I will do it later. But I want to get some of your sense of what your process was like in writing the book. I think it could encourage me, but also others who are thinking of taking on some projects. So after the break, chatting some more with the author of the book Space Between Us, Jamaal Aflatooni. We'll be right back. Welcome back again, joined tonight by author Jamaal Aflatooni, who wrote the book Space Between Us. Jamaal, as I mentioned before the break, it's tough because we want to talk about the book, and we did, but we don't want to do too many spoilers, so we didn't talk about too much of the plot, but I hope people will read the book and get to experience it for themselves, as I got to do this week. I thought it could be cool to hear your thoughts and your experience in writing the book, because I think you're working on a second book, and that this would be your first book. So I can imagine there was a whole process of, the idea percolating in your head to it actually becoming a published thing. There was a lot of, things that happened in between there. So maybe if you could share a bit about that process, how long ago this idea was in your head, and what that process of actually making it into a book was like for you.
Yeah, and so I think I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I really had this idea for this specific book when I was in college. It was around like 2009 or so. In college, we're always thinking about ways in which how we can improve society, and I think this is sort of one of those books, or an idea of a book that I had to kind of express my feelings on how the world was sort of heading. And so I really just put it off, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that I didn't have time, or I just didn't really think that I'd be able to do it because I didn't have any writing experience, that I wouldn't really be able to hunker down and actually get it done. And part of the issue was that I didn't really know where to start. Like I had the story, or the concept of the story in my head, but how do you really kind of deliver that into a full-blown novel, if you will? And so, like I said, around the 2016 election, when a lot of things were just heating up across the country, I thought, maybe I should really get working on this, because I think it's a good time to talk about this specific message or the themes that you see in the book. And as I said, I wrote a lot of it on my commute into work. I got most of it done throughout that time. But the process was really, creating an outline, kind of delivering how I wanted the book to be structured in order, chapter by chapter. And then after the outline was completed, really just writing the story and filling in a lot of the, gaps of, dialogue and interactions with certain characters and things like that. I think what made it the most challenging for me it's just the sheer amount of time, because it's not like, oh, you're just writing out a story and that's it. No, you have to, you're not going to be able to write it out all in one sitting. Sometimes you might even put it off for like a week, especially if you have a full-time job like I do. And so to be able to pick up right where you left off, and even just trying to remember what you had previously written can be hard. And obviously you have to read it over multiple times to make sure that everything is grammatically correct and all that stuff. And so the time is what was really the hard part for me, just because I felt like I was just spending a lot of time on it, and you almost feel like you're not making that much progress. But then when you see the progress over time and you start getting more towards the beat of the story and you get towards the end, it's definitely a rewarding feeling. And so I think for me, not being someone that has any writing experience, not an author, and still I can't even call myself an author just because it's not really what I do. It's more of just kind of a passion, it's writing to me. That really anybody can do something like this, a project or an idea that you have that you just don't think you can make into a reality. I always encourage people that if you really want to do something, you really have to dedicate the time to do it, and it'll get done. And that's just kind of what I did with this, was just making sure every day on my commute, like, no, I'm not going to watch a show on Netflix, or I'm not going to try to take a nap before I get to work. Like, I'm really just going to focus every day on my commute that I'm going to do this. And it got done. And, I hired an editor that obviously helps to, make, all the grammatical errors and things like that. And that was sort of the process. And then once everything got completed, creating a cover and getting it published, and that's where it is today. And I was able to publish it. I guess it was a little over 2 years ago now.
Very cool. Yeah. There's a lot of things as you're talking. I had like a few thoughts. I'll try to see which ones, I can share right now. One of them was, I don't consider myself an author, but you wrote a book. And I think that actually, shows how we can think about it. Like, we imagine author is this person that is like, has some kind of status, or they just were born to write. But I think an author is anyone who's written a book or writes, it would be an author. So I think it was through action that you became, it's funny, like that verb turned you into a noun. So you wrote a book and it made you an author, because now that's what you've done. And I think a lot of times we have that where we hold ourselves back, saying, well, I'm not a dancer or a comedian or whatever it is. We think we're not that because it's almost like this, it's like something you're born as and that's it. And either you are it or you're not. But almost anything, that kind of a thing that we're talking about, you have to take the steps, as you were saying, and then you become that. So I think you definitely are an author because you wrote a book and you put the time in to make that happen, which I think is very commendable, and I hope everyone listening, and myself included, will recognize that, because I think everyone has something. It doesn't have to be a book. It might even be exactly art related. It might even be like going back to school or working on some kind of project or helping with something that we put off for a variety of reasons. And some of the things you said, they're real things, but they're also things that we can make it as an excuse. Well, I don't have the time, or I can't do it, or the feeling of I don't know how to do it. But, we have to just start. So I think starting is one of the biggest, the hardest parts for so many people, is that we put something off because we come up with all the excuses to do that. But I think it's great that you realize you have to just jump into it. And there was some things that pushed you a little bit more, that gave you that extra motivation, but you made it happen. And I think that's wonderful. I think I'm reflecting on for myself and things that I'd like to work on, because I talked to you on the commercial break. I think we tend to think, well, there'll be a time for this, or at the right time, or somehow it'll fall into my lap, or something is going to happen that'll make it so this gets done. But usually that doesn't happen. It just boils down to us taking that step and then making it into a reality. And I'm holding your book in my hand in front of me, and so clearly you did that. You took the steps, and it was wasn't a few steps, it was lots and lots of little steps, but over time you got to that finish line of having the book done. And I think that's remarkable and inspirational. As you said, you had a full-time job as you were writing the book, so I think that makes the time excuse seem less reasonable for most people. They probably have to find the time, just like anything in our lives that we want to do. But I think it's really inspiring that you you made that happen to make this book a reality. And the only thing that made it a reality was your hard work and dedication to make it so.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I think you really hit it, right? It's the starting. Like, actually, like,
Yeah.
rather than just talking about it and rather than it just being an idea in your head, is actually beginning that. And I think that once I sort of started working on it and I made it a point to finish it, right? It's like, I'm not going to have it be one of these things that I start and then I don't finish. Like, I'm gonna finish this, you know, and then, and you almost kind of becomes like a competition within yourself. Like, no, I'm gonna do this. You know, like I've doubted myself before on various things that I wanted to do, but this one I'm gonna do. And you almost kind of make it a challenge, and it could be hard. You know, it could be a struggle. And I think if it's something that you're really passionate about and you really want to make sure that it's completed, you'll get it done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the starting is so tough, but of course, you know, it's not that once you start, it's finished. Now you got to do all the work, the hard work to get there, and clearly you did that. And as you're saying, you're thinking about it like an idea, and I think we all have these ideas, and you know, there's so many cliche statements that can be true in one context, but not in another. So when people say it's the thought that counts, when it comes to something like this, the thought doesn't mean anything. You have to get it done or it doesn't exist, right? So the thought is nice in your head, but it doesn't really count for much in the real world. So we've all thought, oh, I should do this someday, or I could do that. Or during the pandemic, everyone was going to become an expert in 50 different things. But unless you actually do it, the thought doesn't amount to much. So I think it's great that you translated that thought into action. And in the last few minutes, I was just curious, I know you're working on a second book, I believe. Anything you can, tease about that next project?
Yeah, no, so I am. It's very slow coming, and a couple of reasons why it is. So when I wrote Space Between Us, at the time I didn't have any children, and now I have a child, so that eats up a lot more of my time. The other thing is I mentioned I wrote the majority of this book, honestly, 80-85% of it on my commute, on the BART ride into work, and so now that I'm not commuting into work and I'm working from home, that sort of time has gone away. So, I am. It's not related to Space Between Us. It's an entirely different story, and I'm just kind of plunking away at it as I can with having a full-time job, trying to raise a child. Life in a way is kind of almost gotten busier in a pandemic, which is odd because you kind of get afforded more time, but trying to watch your kid while you're working at the same time can be challenging. But yes, I am in the process of writing a second book, and I think it'll probably be a few years before I fully complete it. But my hope is that I do eventually get there.
I hope you do too, and based on what we're just talking about, it'll happen when you make it happen. So I think you're trying to find that balance to get it done. And look at you saying you're not an author. You wrote a book and you're working on your second one. So
yeah.
I think definitely that would make you an author. But yeah, I think it is funny how you're like, wait, I'm an author, but yeah, you've written a book. But I think a lot of people can have that experience where they think they're not what they actually are because they take those actions to make it happen. But I definitely look forward to reading that book. When it gets done, and I appreciate that you did write this book because I got to read it and enjoy it, and definitely been reflecting on it. I read it throughout the week, so different parts of it I was reading, and by the end of it, there was a lot to digest, and so I just finished it yesterday. So I'll keep thinking about it. But I'm very grateful to you for having written this book.
Yeah, no, and I'm very grateful for you to have me on your show to talk about it. I always like, just talking to people about these kind of things and talking about what motivates us, why we do the things that we want to do. And a lot of it for me was just something I noticed within ourselves as a society, as a civilization, and wanting to express how I'm kind of doing it right now and what we need to do to really better ourselves as a result. So. Yeah, I thank you for having me on for sure. Oh,
it's been a pleasure, and like I said, it was a pleasure to read your book. And yeah, I think that was interesting for me in the book of seeing, what makes the characters tick. That's what I think is always nice about fiction is you get to get insight into people's thinking and what motivates them, what's going on, and you see different perspectives, people who are going through different changes, people that are upset with changes and people that are different from them, but some people who can overcome that as well. And I think, probably in reading this book, I can relate to almost everyone in some way. That obviously it's easy to say, when someone's different, be completely accepting and have no thoughts, but we can, it could first come up that, oh, they're different, and it might make you think certain things. But I think you also can see that, well, that doesn't mean I have to be afraid of them, and I can still love them no matter what. And so that theme of loving, every being, essentially is something I felt in this book, all living beings. I know you didn't mention, although there was actually, Mindy was a vegetarian, I think, so that was maybe some way of bringing that in there, that maybe we can love all beings. We don't have to be hurting anybody or any kind of living being that comes up, whether they're, you know them or not, or feel like they're different from you or not. We can always have love and respect for others. So I appreciated that in the book. And again, I really appreciated you writing it, and thank you for joining me tonight on the show.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you having me on, Farid.
Yeah, so hopefully when you write that second book, would love to have you on then. But for now, I guess we'll just have to enjoy this one.
Absolutely. No, I'd be happy to come on again for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamaal. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you. All right. So again, that was Jamaal Aflatooni, who wrote the book Space Between Us. As he says here in the book, you can, he recommends supporting independent bookstores, so you can get it from them. I can't lie, I did get it from Amazon because I hadn't seen this part. But you can also read the book and write a review about it to support a really good guy and a great author. Again, that's Space Between Us. Big thank you to Jamaal Aflatooni for joining me on the show tonight. All right, that's it for tonight. Big thank you to Amir here in the studio. You've been listening to In Session with Dr. Farid Holakouee. Have a wonderful night.